Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hopefully lunch was good. So next, we're going to move into a really interesting session involving climate equity and the like. And to start things off, I want to go ahead and pass it off to Sabir first. But before I do, I'll do a brief intro. Sabir has a joint appointment in the School of Architecture and in the School of Industrial Design. Prior to that, he served as an associate dean of the College for Undergraduate Studies in Creative Activity. He is interested in how cross-cultural and cross-disciplinary framings inform the production, consumption, and interpretation of architecture and design. And just to give you a heads up, I'll briefly intro each person, and then we'll give them the floor to be able to set the stage, and then we'll move down the line in the panel presentation. So, Sabir, please take it away.
Thank you, Joe. Can you guys hear me?
We do have some mics there just in case.
Fantastic.
You have to use
For
the
online.
online people.
Oh, for the online here.
Yeah.
So I have to click and I have to hold this.
Multitasking.
I'm not good at that. Can you guys hear me? Is this too close, too far?
You gotta get up closer.
Is it on? How about now?
Hold it up to you.
It's come on now. How about now?
There we go.
Fantastic, thank you. I have a bit of a throat situation, as they say. But first, when Stuart's invitation came to me, I only knew Stuart maybe just one meeting at an iPad session. And I immediately said yes in this very, very busy week, simply because I've been in this place for a long time, Georgia Tech. And I was quite taken by the fact that someone was putting critical approaches to sustainability and was also talking about diverse knowledges and persistent inequalities. We are right now in this moment of, the Dutch had the tulip hysteria. And I'm not knocking anyone because I was part of this UN SDG first co-learning team, whatever. But there is a UN SDG hysteria on campus. And it's very emblematic of the US Academy. And I teach a course on inequity and inequality in the built environments of the United States. I know how difficult that is. And I also try and bring knowledges that not just come from the academy, knowledges that come from diverse sources. So with that, I thought it might not be a bad idea to share with you what do I press? Do I press the top side? That I might share with you what I've just come through. We had a really terrific set of presentations in this interdisciplinary seminar for industrial design. The cool thing for me at Tech is industrial design gives me a portal to engineering students as well as my summer to computing students. Architecture, not so much, but in this ID research seminar, what we do is have a shared topic, and then the students identify its various dimensions through a set of readings, but also their interests. So this semester, because I had a grant, I used the 17 SDGs to provide an entry into a historicized understanding of a complicated web of interconnected issues. And those were the things I put on the table, and then some came through the readings. But really the goal here was, we can't just think of sustainability through these instrumentalist, solutionist, and presentist mindsets that are so prevalent or ascendant on campus. So we brought on faith, we brought on convenience, a number of things, and we'll see in a minute. But this was what was so fascinating, that it actually worked. I could get this to work. So we starting with the historicizing aspect of it, it's very, very clear. sustainability talk goes back to the 70s, and there is very, very little to show for it. This is a very partial roll call. We went through all of these. Essentially, we're looking at them as discursive artifacts, produced at particular historical moments, negotiated between unequal actors, and all implementation is left to individual states. So even the UN SDG went over a series of 5 years of lots and lots and lots of people meeting, but the end shot is they are not enforceable. So it is a beautiful way of understanding unequal discourse. It leaves its traces, it leaves its marks. But it was also, for me, always important to get some history. So, we go to the Club of Rome, the limits to growth. In fact, one of the students is showing from Wall Street Journal 1912 that climate change was already awake. In fact, you go back in the 1600s, the Black Forests in Germany and others are talking about climate change based on how much deforestation that has occurred. So all of this is in the air, but really not brought to the surface. What am I supposed to be pressing here? There's lots of sellotape on this. Stuart? The one on the side? Okay. I think I have, may need to go back. Okay, can you control it, Joe?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit better.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out what all the sellotape is. Stuart, if I just ask you to, that would be very interesting. So we were looking at the SDGs, and the whole point was, as the title of the course was, thinking through, thinking with, which is a classic pedagogical exercise. And I have quotes here simply because I don't want to paraphrase people. So everyone knows the Brundtland Commission report from 1987 that gave us the definition that still goes on. Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. It's very clear whose needs and why. Jumping up to the GT sustainability next plan, you realize a complete shift has happened between 1987 and the sort of the neoliberal discourse that has happened. Humanity faces a host of critical and complex challenges that will threaten our health and future unless we work together to create innovative solutions that, my italics, lower our environmental footprint without reducing our quality of life. There's a significant shift here. And so this was part of putting the students on notice that this is going to be discomfort zone, that we are going to be looking at these statements and unpacking them. Because they were all architecture and industrial design students at different levels, undergraduate and graduate, I wanted to put a few things on the table about sustainability that we don't cover in our professional curriculum. We never think about labor. We barely think about materials. So that quote from the Architectural Review is very clear. The same logic that justifies the exploitation of natural resources also justifies the exploitation of workers around the world, from those soldering the parts of an iPhone, to those mining lithium and cobalt for car batteries, to those processing sand for the production of concrete. And then from Red Pepper, this was an article on Spanish Sahara, or that particular whole complex thing where Morocco has essentially taken over it. Infinite extraction and consumption are impossible on a planet with finite resources. If the political, economic, and social structures perpetuating injustice remain unaltered, the proposed green transition by the global north is merely an evolution of long-standing imperial and colonial relationships. Next, please. And there we have it. We are looking at the silver mine at Potosi, the richest city in the world that built the Spanish Empire, where silver and then other metals were extracted. This is a painting from 1585. You can see that. And just one quote from the Jesuit priest. If 20 healthy Indians enter on a Monday, half may emerge crippled on Saturday. 500 years later, the same mines, Bolivia, lithium, and that's where our hero at Georgia Tech had to say. After the coup that removed Morales, he said, we will coup anyone we want, deal with it. So in that span, the space opens up to talk about sustainability in the longue durée. Next, please. We also covered a few other things because history matters. And Mike Davis, who passed a couple of years ago, this particular book places everything in a thick context, to use an anthropological term. It's literally called Late Victorian Holocaust, El Nino Famines and the Making of the Third World. And he points out that how what he called the implacable cogwheels of modern history, capital accumulation, colonial land dispossession, and abrupt climate change combined to produce some of the worst strategies in human history and to sow the seeds of underdevelopment. He makes a very interesting point that before the Victorian reign, nations in terms of wealth were more or less equal, certainly from the Mughal India points on. But then, by the end of the Victorian period, the inequality between nations was as profound as the inequality of classes in any of those countries. And his documentation of this is, you can't look away. It is the Bengal famine, the Chinese famine, everywhere. Next, please. We started the course in the second week because my spring lectives, I always use MLK Day as a pivot from history to today. And so this semester, we read Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break the Silence. This was, as you know, the speech that then had him canceled and maybe assassinated a month later, because the New York Times editorialized literally saying, stay in your lane, guy. You cannot talk about anything other than race. And that quote there was super important for the students because it suddenly resonated. We must rapidly shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. This is the three giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism. And it's talk about Black Americans in Vietnam, wondering why they are being vilified, vilifying the Viet Cong when they know what their situation back home was. So this became a source. Now, what you're hearing is basically not just talking about the 17 UN SDGs, but the backdrop. The next one, please. So Martin Luther King kicked it off. And then, of course, faith. One of the problems that we have at technical and universities like Georgia Tech is that we have such a monovalent way of talking about anything. And so the whole goal here was to bring in all these different kinds of discursive modes, from MLK's sermons from the 60s to the Catholic Church. In this case, Pope Francis Laudato Si on care for a common home. This encyclical letter calls out reckless consumerism, ecological degradation, and global warming. So again, it's not the expert speaking, it's not the expert in the technical Ivy Tower, but saying, look, other people have talked about it too, and maybe we can enter this debate through that. Very interesting things happened here, and two students worked on this as the kind of pivot forward. Next, please. The third one, obviously, was taking on these words: growth, development, progress, because those are the things that we have to shatter. Otherwise, we're just always talking about growth and development. This piece, 5 editors from New Delhi, called Pluriverse, a Post-Development Dictionary. I'm sure you know of it. And it was really important for the students to recognize that, hey, an edition published in New Delhi has writers from all 5 continents pushing back at growth, development, and progress. And they basically called a lot of things out here, but I just bolded this, which is also relative to our culture here. In the absence of fundamental sociocultural transformation, technological and managerial innovation would not lead us out of crisis. And that, I just want to say, led to the last paper presentation yesterday, where this student developed this neologism that I'm going to use all the time. He was talking about alienation through Marx and Engels, through Marcuse, but he came up using object fetishism. He came up with this neologism, which I think says it all about us: policy fetishism. That we think if we have policy, we're already done. All our work is done. Next, please. Then Adrian Buller. Now, these are 27, 28-year-old researchers in think tanks all over Europe. This is an incredible book called The Value of a Whale on the Illusions of Green Capitalism. And she just takes every single mechanism and works her way through. And basically, this whole neoliberal moment where there's nothing but the market, everything is, the problems are coded that way, solutions are coded that way. And this was the thing that ranked with the students. How do we pry the future out of the hands of corporations and technocrats? They'd never really thought of that way. So those are the 4. And next, please. Oh, so this was an example from one of the papers looking at green capitalism. Giving you an example of what some of the students found. This is these indigenous forest dwellers in Nairobi, outside Nairobi in the Mau Forest, being evicted by the Kenyan Forestry Department that has taken a card out of the colonial playbook and calling it now a national preserve. And what I knew about it was that article there, and that was when they were destroying all these people to get them to move out. What we didn't know is sitting behind the Kenyan police is a UAE-based carbon offset company called Blue Carbon. And so think about it: sustainability, green capitalism, buying forests and evicting indigenous people. And this happened in the student who researched this was looking at what happens when an offset forest burns, as it did in Oregon the other day. So here was the setup for all the conversations. And if you go to the next slide, please. I didn't get here. And I want to say this, but I still want to share this, because the arc of the semester started with MLK Day, but we could not ignore the ecocide beginning to ramp up and the genocide in Gaza. And this is Andres Malm, who I'm sure a lot of you know from his book called Fossil Capital: The Rise of Steam Power and the Roots of Global Warming. We looked at this in the class. But in this piece, which is on the Verso blog, and the link is there, I just want to read this out. The last 6 months of genocide and ecocide in Gaza have ushered in a new phase in a long history of colonization and extraction that reaches back to the 19th century. To truly understand the present crisis requires a longue durée analysis of Palestine's subjugation to fossil empire. So he's already put on, he's an incredible researcher, academic, activist. He's already put that the next book, he has like 5 books on his back burner or front burner, is Fossil Empire. And that quote is there from, 1840 was a pivotal year in history for both the Middle East and the climate system. It marked the first time the British Empire deployed steamboats in a major war. It was through the projection of violence that Britain integrated other countries into the strange kind of economy it had created by turning fossil capital into fossil empire. And there's one last slide. So we didn't quite cover it. We didn't read it. I couldn't get myself feeling safe enough to go to Gaza in the class, but we brought it up continually. What we did bring up and hopefully put to pay were these two quotes. It is time to stop waffling. The evidence is pretty strong that the greenhouse effect is here. This is Jim Hansen, who then had to resign and become a maverick, according to the New York Times, in 1988, because that was Herbert Walker Bush's moment. And he wasn't going to go, Bush wasn't going to go to the Rio summit. And at that point, it was a case of, well, that might look bad for the US. But that's what he said. And this is the thing that our students have to grapple with. The American way of life is not up for negotiations, period. That's George Herbert Walker Bush, and whoever Ghost wrote for Cabrera said the same thing, not at the cost of our quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabir. Next, we're going to have Jenny Hirsch come up and let me briefly introduce Jenny. I'm sure many of you already know her, but she is an applied cultural anthropologist, recognized internationally, and she is the inaugural senior director of the Center for Sustainable Communities, Research and Education, also known as SCORE. It creates a culture of collaboration across various stakeholder groups. Her research spans a lot of issues. We're going to get into some community talk here. I know, Jenny, I'm not going to do this intro too much longer, but she is also a co-founder and lead coordinator of RCE Greater Atlanta. I felt like that was important to say in this context. With that being said, take it away, Jenny.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be here. Thanks for opening us. You always have thought-provoking ideas to start us off. So I don't have slides. I'm going to share a couple things I've been thinking about in relation to this symposium, which is fascinating in its combination of things that it's bringing together, ideas it's bringing together. And to the point of this panel, which is about equity and environmental justice and sustainability. So I have a couple points I want to make, and some of them are going to draw on some things you said and some things that were said this morning. So one of them is, I think when we think about sustainability and environmental justice, it's really important that we think about the importance of process and of principles. I know there's a lot of P's in sustainability. The SDGs have 5 P's. There are lots of 3 P's. There are 3 E's. But these are 2 P's that aren't in any of those P's, process and principles. I just wrote a paper, and I don't know, Stuart, if you're doing any follow-up, but if so, I'm happy to send a few resources that we could share out there that I'll mention during this. Just wrote a paper with a handful of other authors from across the country that was commissioned by the National Academies on the importance of just process, meaning just and equitable process for industrial decarbonization, and the fact of how little attention is paid to process. So as Joe said, I'm going to talk a lot about what does it mean to advance sustainability, the SDGs, whatever you want to call it, through university community partnerships, because that's what I do. So one of them is really thinking about what does it mean to establish just processes. And there's just minimal attention paid to that right now. For those of you familiar with Justice 40, which is putting billions of dollars out there for a whole bunch of different kinds of programs around the country that are supposed to address climate and energy challenges. Our center is the lead for community benefit, what they're called community benefit plans, on 2 major grants, both of which are 2 major awards, both of which are under negotiation right now, but have to do with carbon management. And very little attention. There's a lot of talk about 40% of the outcomes of the benefits have to benefit historically marginalized communities, what they call disadvantaged communities. We don't use that term, but for historically marginalized communities, but nobody knows what that means. And there's no consideration given to the fact that these projects are we could say always, they're 99.999% of the time run by developers, run by business, right? Because that is who is putting forth the money that gets matched by government to do these huge projects. So they're often run by people from business or technology areas who have zero background, zero training, and zero experience working with historically marginalized communities and tend not to come from those communities. Yet they are supposed to make sure that 40% of the benefits go to these types of communities, but there's no dictated process about how those communities are part of the decision-making process. It's hugely problematic. And so it's really important that we think about process and don't just run to solutions and don't just rush to solutions and rush to outcomes. People a lot of times, since we're known for our community engagement work, will say to me, well, what's the answer to this? And I say, well, the answer is that we need to bring people to the table and ask them. They're not going to know the answer either. We need deliberative processes that produce answers together, including they don't understand these technologies. The people understand the technologies need to be at the table, and the people understand communities need to be, and from those communities need to be at the table. And there need to be professional facilitators who can facilitate deliberative conversation that leads to different solutions. So that's one thing I wanted to put in the conversation. And the other is that we really need to think about principles. By which I don't just mean like, are we being ethical? I mean, sets of principles that as project teams, we need to understand and agree to. So for example, 1991, the environmental justice community put out a set of principles called the 17 Principles for Environmental Justice. You can find it online. We should be following those principles. I can guarantee if we all read them, we wouldn't understand everything that they meant. And certainly the technologists in the room, it would many times be the first time they're ever thinking about probably most of them. So we need to be understanding what the principles are for how we work together and what the principles are and our values for guiding our solutions. And then we need to follow those principles. We need to agree that we will be bound to them together. We are working right now in our center with a bunch of our faculty fellows and some of our center's advisors, community advisors, to develop a set of community engaged research principles for Georgia Tech as a primarily white institution that is working on sustainability with community partners in the Southeast, very much grounded in who we are and the place we're at this particular point in time. And if you're interested in this kind of thing, we are going to have a workshop on these principles May 14th at a community-based space called the Atlanta Arts Exchange. And I'm happy to share that information out with you if you're interested in joining. We'd love to have you. So 3 more things, I guess, quickly that back up the idea of process and principles. One is that earlier today, Josiah Hester talked about moving at the speed of trust, which is a really common phrase in community-based work. Joe, I always mention you had, when you presented to the fellows program that we ran together this past summer, you had that great, you were talking about one of your community-based partnerships with Eco Action. And you had this great slide, which I loved. And I don't remember exactly what it said, but basically it had a couple words on it. And it said something like, this relationship took 2 years to develop. Is that what it said? That's all it said. And then you said again, 2 years. It's one relationship, right? Which you have a good relationship with now. but emphasizing how much time this takes, and going back to the conversations earlier today, that there needs to be credit and rewards given for investing that kind of time. Because if we actually want solutions, we have to have those relationships to get to the solutions, because we don't own the knowledge that we need with just us to come up with these solutions. So another, years ago, an Africanist who worked in Mali a lot when I was at Northwestern taught me a phrase that they use there a lot that I always love, which is slowly, slowly catch monkey. Maybe some of you've heard of it, but if you run up really quickly, the monkey runs away, apparently. And I've never tried to catch a monkey, but that's what he said. So thinking about trust, another thing is really thinking, and this came up with you and it came up a lot this morning, really thinking about history. We really, really need our historians. I would say that the way that technology and engineering is often taught is as if it's ahistorical. Most students who graduate from here know nothing about the history of their field. And that is unforgivable if we don't want to create the mistakes of the past. If you want to do environmental justice work, you have to understand the history of technology and industrialization in marginalized communities of color. Otherwise, you will repeat all those mistakes. And then finally, under process and principles, there was Josiah mentioned something else this morning about thinking about indigenous evaluation methods. Like how do we evaluate what's a good relationship, what's a good partnership, and get credit for it? We really, really need to and you do a lot of work, Joe, on trying to figure out social life cycle analysis, or how to combine qualitative and quantitative metrics, right? So that qualitative work can be considered by people who think that if there's not data for it, then it doesn't matter, which is a huge problem in itself that we can discuss a different time or later if you want to, because so much life cannot be condensed into metrics. So that's the importance of process and principles piece. And then three other, just quickly, and then I want to turn it over to Britta. We need to support community-driven work and visions, as opposed to always asking community to support the solutions that research thinks we should implement. So there is, in the Southeast, what that looks like for us in our work, there is a network of grassroots environmental justice organizations across the Southeast that have come together in response to all the Justice 40 work and created a 10-year Southeast Regional Environmental Justice Strategic Climate Action Plan. We all should, who are working on these issues in the Southeast, we should be familiar with that plan. I can send you a link to it if you want. And we should be saying, can our work advance their vision for what the Southeast looks like? Same with using their principles. The director of sustainability for the city of Atlanta, who comes out of an EJ organizing background, said at one of these conferences back last fall, everyone's always talking about developing principles. We have principles. They were developed in 1991. Let's just use those. Two other things. One is that we have to prioritize community voice in our research work, which means we have to learn to listen and not be defensive. It's very hard for many of us to do. And we have to be open to the community saying, this is not the solution I want. So we just had a big symposium on direct air capture last week. Most communities, most environmental justice organizations have come out against direct air capture as a false solution, and which we can talk about later what that means if you're interested. And they're only at the table because the Biden-Harris administration included direct air capture in Justice 40, so billions of dollars is going out to fund it. So now they want to be at the table because it's happening in their communities, but they are against it. So what does that mean when we work with them? What does community engagement look like? We have to listen to them and go in based on where they're starting from. And this is not just to be nice, it's to get solutions that work. And then finally, the last thing I want to say is that we need to change how we teach engineering, and we need to change how we teach science. So this is the systems level work that Richmond Wong was talking about this morning, in my opinion. That's what it looks like in our own worlds. At our Direct Air Capture Symposium last week, we had our guest speaker, Dr. Simone Stewart from the National Wildlife Federation, was talking about, well, changing engineering education is something we've been working on for years in Serve, Learn, Sustain to try and figure out. And we have a paper we've written on this based on our work, but what she was talking about was that it is everybody we train in engineering, in policy and science, all these students who are taught nothing about their industries. They're taught nothing about history, almost nothing, not just about their industries. They're taught almost nothing about history. When we take students, which we regularly do through our programs, to the West Side, where Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement were birthed, literally, we take them there. Most of them have never been there. When we take faculty to organizations and neighborhoods that are 15 minutes from here by car, faculty who've been at Georgia Tech for their entire career, most of them have never been there. This is unforgivable. We are a public institution, and we are not requiring that our students even see where Martin Luther King was born, let alone go to the King Center or learn anything about Auburn Avenue or anything about the history of our area. And they're here for many years. And we don't require that that become part of their education. We are not just doing a disservice. I would say we are 100% shirking our responsibility as a public institution. And what Simone Stewart was saying, which we all know, is these are the people that go on to be in the Department of Energy. These are the people that go on to make major decisions at all of these technology companies. These are the people that, and they know, and we didn't show them what's in their backyard. So it's a huge problem, and we're not going at a systems level. We're not going to make major change unless we change the root of the problem, which is how we're preparing these engineers and these scientists and these policymakers and stuff to become our leaders. And I have a bunch of articles I could share on this, but I think I'll end there.
Hopefully the wheels are turning on some questions after these two talks. And as we move to our third, we have Britta Kallin. Hopefully I'm saying your last name correctly. Is an associate professor and associate chair of the School of Modern Languages. She received her PhD in German literature from the University of Cincinnati and joined the faculty at Georgia Tech in the same year. Is a specialist in contemporary German and Austrian women's literature and theater. She has published on theater, gender, race, and national identity in a wide array of books and journals. Her interest in women's theater and critical race studies is also reflected in her monograph entitled The Presentation of Racism in Contemporary German and Austrian Plays. Thank you, Britta.
Thank you so much, Joe, for the kind introduction. I'm here instead of Brigitte, and Brigitte would have done a much better job than I have. But I wanted to share some writing that we've done in the School of Modern Languages. Natalie, you saw her earlier, she moderated, and Jenny also is in this book. There's some articles about the humanistic approach. And maybe I can just say thank you, Sabir, and thank you, Jenny, for these wonderful introductions. I'm going to keep it short because I think we have a lot to discuss, but I wanted to share a little bit the kind of maybe outsider perspective coming in from Germany, where I grew up, where I was raised. And so I think there are a lot of misunderstandings, even if you speak English with each other, right? Most of our communication is lots of misunderstandings. What we teach in the School of Modern Languages is a foreign language or a modern language or a different world language, they call it. And so what we try to teach is different values and norms that exist in other cultures and that local knowledge. And so in order to build these partnerships that Joe has done and that Jenny and Sabir, you know, that we're all trying to do with communities, either local or international, we need to kind of focus also on how we communicate with each other. And I think there's a lot of space for improvement. And so intercultural communication skills are one way of doing that. As we know, there are a lot of international conflicts. Sabir mentioned one earlier. There is a lot going on that we want, all the money that's going into the military right now, we want that to go into green energies, right? So we want a lot of changes. So we need to communicate with each other in a much better way. What we also teach in our classes, and I teach a class on sustainability in Germany, is social sustainability. So we've heard about climate changes, extreme temperatures, where do these climate refugees go, right? Where are they being sent? Where do they go? Whether it's Europe or the United States or other places that allow them to maybe have a little more hope to make it. And so we mentioned earlier about environmental sustainability, economic and social sustainability. So how can we help our students learn more about the situation here, the history here, but also how to work with refugees that come to the United States, that live here in and around our city, and how can we integrate them into the society so that they have a chance of getting a better life. We mentioned also that gender and race play an important role, as well as religion, right? With our kind of ethnic identity, who is getting, the good jobs. We talked about the white man, the white, kind of brotherhood that is still at the top, and how equity is not distributed equally. And then also, how do we understand these cultural values? How do we work with people who are into plant and animal studies? What can they teach us? And I think there's a lot that we can learn from people who are not, kind of just doing social studies or engineering or even humanities. But, what do we learn from people who are looking at other communities that are not human communities? And so I wanted to end this right now and thank the two other speakers. Those were great historical presentations, and that's what I try to do in my classes, kind of teach the history, the deforestation that existed in Germany when they were trying to cut down, forests to burn them up for firewood. And they realized, oops, the trees are not growing as quickly as we need them to grow. So thank you so much for your attention, and thank you for those two speakers. We can open it up. Thanks.
All right, I think we have, about 20 minutes or so for questions? 15, all right.
Joe,
Can I just make one quick
Absolutely,
comment here?
please.
It's on. When both of you is talking about the importance of history and why they're not getting taught that, in my experience here, you just have to take it into your class to provide the historical framework there. I teach for the College of Computing in Barcelona last summer to a person, two courses, one called City Literacy, to a person, 36 students, only one person had heard of Reconstruction. Those who have, and he was from California, right? A good public high school system. The reason is because everything is compartmentalized here. Everything we do has to have its own historical ballast. The second thing is politics. So from the folks that I've been teaching with, and these are people I respect in other colleges, one person says during this year, well, I tell all my students to leave politics outside the classroom door. And my question to him was, how about the politics that's already in the classroom? Because that's where we have to problematize. Another colleague in public policy, the first time we started the SLS, climate change, literally said, the science is not settled yet. The number of people who are still defending Gareth Hardin's, the tragedy of the commons, that only market will do it, is all around us. All I say this is because we're not a liberal arts and science university. The gaps are massive. And all of us who are interested in this more complex thing have to take it all on. We can't depend on the culture of this place.
And with that initial statement, I want to open up the floor for any audience questions. It can be in relation to this or something else that the other panelists have stated. I see some eyebrows raising, but I can start off with a question of my own. And this is in regard to, I want to stick on this policy conversation And you made mention, Sabir, about policy fetishism. And I couldn't help but think of how do we move away from policy fetishism to some sort of effective behavior change or intervention in attempting to achieve sustainable development as an academic and research focused institution. That's a big question, but I'm just curious on what the panelists might think about, policy for the sake of policy moving towards something that's more tangible in behavior change.
Just have a quick
Question
question.
for you. Did you say effective or affective?
I was just saying fetishism.
No, you said affective change. or
Attempting
effective.
to achieve sustainable development.
Effective.
Yeah.
Because it also has to do with the affective change that has to happen.
Mhm.
It's very simple. Just stop talking about policy. But the thing is, that's where our students go. They go to Accenture, they go to all these other places. Why aren't they going across, as Jenny said, to a year in any number of the communities that are around? Because we've already said that you're coming here to become part of the leadership class. So policy is what leaders do. I mean, I'll give you an example here with Atlanta. And there's a beautiful, beautiful piece that talks about Atlanta since Maynard Jackson takes them all to task. And the article is called The Black Misleadership Class, like our mayor right now. And they have nothing to do with the poor communities of color that you work in. So there's such a gap. Those who do policy go to government, go to consultancies. And that's why I'm saying, let's just stop talking about policy. Let's say, what are you going to do in your residency, let's say, in your neighborhoods and your communities?
And I did say effective at first, but it could mean both in this case.
I think two comments, I guess. One is I think we also have to stop talking about behavior change, because I think I wouldn't say stop. I would say we have to stop talking about behavior change. Behavior change is fine, but this came up this morning too. Is this a problem? Is climate a problem that's about individual behavior, or is it a problem about that we address as communities, right? The truth of it is we need behavior change. I mean, we need more people to take public transit. We also need a better public transit system, right? More people will take it if there's a better public transit system. But we also have a lot of communities that actually are doing the right things. We have a lot of communities out there that if we look to what they're doing and we follow the things they're trying to do in community, we'll get there. And so I think behavior change is a very individual way of looking at it. And it also is a blaming way of looking at it. So we use something in our center called asset-based community development, which means how do we stand up and highlight the things people are doing well and the visions that they have and try to follow those, instead of where the environmental movement has failed is that we try to guilt everybody and then we wonder why they don't come want to work with us. Right? Even my own mother, she comes, and I do not actually have a background as an environmentalist. I was an anthropologist, right? And I came to sustainability through justice, equity and justice work, social justice work. At some point, my mother came to visit from what we know is the best city, Chicago.
Oh.
And she said something to me about, I don't know, how she had been buying something that was only sold in individual packaging, and that I was going to see when I went in the bathroom that there's these little packages in this garbage can. And, she hopes she's sorry. I was like, what do you mean? Like, she felt guilt. I mean, I hadn't said anything to her, but she knows everything I work on. And somehow she was feeling guilty about buying whatever it was that she bought that was only sold in little wrapped packages, and this is a problem, right? We don't want us to walk in a room and people to like hide their water bottle. You're not going to get people to work with you that way. So we want to look at what people are doing well. We want to look at the community level as opposed to the individual level, and go from there. So that's one way to do stuff that's other than policy.
I, for one, do feel some guilt when I buy gummies for my students during final presentations, and it's all individually packaged in plastic. I'm working on that.
It's not coming from me, the guilt.
No, it's not your fault, Jenny.
I'm Jewish. I'm good at the guilt, but that's not coming from me.
Behavior change, and I'm just looking back at American literature, but there's so much out there in terms of arts and kind of creative writing. So I think that part of what our society is trying to learn or to grapple with also comes from artists and authors and critics who tell us a little bit about what the future could look like, right? If we look at science fiction, there's a lot that we can see, a lot that was already written in the 1800s, which we are grappling with, kind of dealing with now. So I'm thinking that humans are just very kind of task-based, but also, very open to new ideas and to making change and maybe learning through art and literature.
I have to build on that because that's so important and say one more thing. Who here has heard of Afrofuturism? I mean, that's amazing that all your hands went up. I think 5 years ago, maybe no hands would have gone up. I mean, Black Panther did a lot for Afrofuturism, but right? A future in which Black people exist, a future in which Black people have power, and we could expand this to just say marginalized groups, right, have power. I think one of the things we've been writing and doing a lot of work around, that I have been in my work, is how do you incorporate Afrofuturism into our built environment? There's, for the first time ever, there's a person in architecture teaching a studio, right, design class that is building from an Afrofuturist lens. One of the things that I think is so powerful about Afrofuturism is that when we think about who is allowed to imagine a different kind of future, that is also something that is generally of the privileged groups. Sometimes it's even hard for people in marginalized communities to imagine a future at all, to imagine a future in which they're alive, or to imagine a future that looks like anything different than what they have been exposed to. So part of the question of thinking about things like a sustainable future is helping people imagine that it's not just today with more solar panels. What does a really different future look like? And then once you can imagine that, you can think about how do we get there? But that's a big part of the work we're also trying to do, is to expand imagination and give people the right to the space and the tools and the right to imagine something different from today.
And I just want to move back out to the audience. I think we do have a few questions now. A few in the back and one in the front. No, that's fine. Stuart's making the decisions.
It's sort of a couple of questions, very different questions. One is, speaking of the right to imagine, but also Sabir, your class. I'm curious about one of the most pressing issues locally here is what is called Cup City, and how did it feature in the discussions in the class, and what does the other members of the panel?
Yes, so very briefly, the movement in class is sort of circular and tangential.
Thank you. I knew that Cup City is there. I also knew that Georgia Tech has put an embargo on it. And the way it came into the class was, you saw that photograph of the Ojek tribal group in Kenya. That comes from the Xylem. The Xylem was our own Georgia Tech student in environmental engineering who runs it, who this year is about to finish up his master's at MIT in science writing. And he was literally, he had such grace to walk up and graduate, but he was literally vilified by the administration and all levels. So when that comes up, obviously I'm going to go to Cop City, but not like and see what Georgia Tech did, but through, for instance, the most current thing, which is demilitarize A to P. So then that starts to put into picture policing and the carceral state. So it's not just Cop City, but Cop City's all its manifestations. So what it was just one session. But yes, so next year, that Cop City is going to come in, not just as Cop City in the process, but all the eddies that come off of it.
I think we had another question or two. Here in the front.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, well, first of all, thank you for the panel. I really have enjoyed listening to your statements, and also thinking about the role of history, the role of space, the city as a you know, I remember I participated a couple of years ago on the city as classroom workshops and all that, but thinking about ways to bringing together some of these initiatives, like, you know, questions on time and space, and also thinking about our own history, engaging with these questions. How you feel about our trajectory as, you know, advocates of sustainability within the institute? How do you feel about, you know, how can we take this and maybe give impulse to new initiatives, or do we need to rethink? Do we need to talk to additional stakeholders in the administration or in the different, you know, student organizations or with different faculty? How could we move forward with a vision of bringing, you know, more of this curriculum that is inflected by history, by space, by all these things? Yeah.
So, very briefly.
You're talking about the city that's all around us.
Mhm.
Atlanta does nothing with it. It only works with the developer elites. I'm talking with the developer elites. Just think of the people we invite to our various sessions, graduation, even the College of Design. We're only working with the elites because that's where we want our students to go. End of story. How do we become more, how do we bring the things in? The Trojan horse is the city outside. We need to bring it on campus. It's as simple as that. For many years, I've said our platform in the College of Design, the stage, could be open to things that are happening in the city. It's not happening because some skater kids with canisters came, and then there was Atlanta APD everywhere. It could happen again with this arts initiative, but I'm not sanguine at all. Not sanguine at all, because University of Michigan has done it in a very different way. It's like a let 1,000 flowers bloom. But this is going to be a top-down arts thing. But arts is one really good way because it allows you to question. Artists don't answer questions, they ask questions, which is my concern with Afrofuturism and the way it comes in. Afrofuturism has been, in its history, by the way, it's a term that came after, and it was by an art critic, a white art critic in the UK. But it's in the mix because of Janelle Monáe, of Octavia Butler, all of that. When it comes into, let's say, design, then it comes in as trademarked, as this is cool, this is for us, but not that it opens up the questions of the right to imagine and so on. So I think when arts, if and well it arrives, would be the one that we should all be in the Trojan horse, because it will have a little bit more money than anything else has had so far.
And I think we're about half past. Should we move to closing comments or continue with Q&A?
Yeah, I just wanted to just add, I think there is this initiative, and I think it makes sense because students have asked for it, just like in the past, they've asked for more humanities, not just such a focus on the STEM fields, but they wanted to take more kind of, you know, classes that turn them into a globally minded citizen and have that holistic view. And so there's more of a focus on experiential learning. And I don't know if it's in all areas, but in our classes also, they do more service learning. And we hear from our students that they like going out into the communities. We've taken them to the theater. We're going, on study abroad. They are doing internships. So they don't want to be stuck on campus only in the ivory tower, but they want to have the curriculum expanded. And I think, it's being done, especially with Latino communities in the area. And so in German also, we do it, with witnesses about the Holocaust. So we, take them to the Bremen Museum and they get to hear from people who actually were in concentration camps. So I think that's one way of taking them out. I don't know if it really is an answer. It's probably just, part of it, but it is something that our students say that they really enjoy when they go out into the real world and they see how is, culture experienced in other countries. For example, we look at environmental racism in the United States compared to, what's happening in Europe. Where do people live in Europe, right? In which ghettos in and around Paris or in Germany do they live, and what access do they have to fresh food, etc. So I think these are things when, I think we can broaden their horizon by just explaining to them, that it's different in different cultures. Thank you.
So I have a much more positive view of it. Sabir, no surprise there. Well, I don't agree with you about Afrofuturism, but regardless of that, I do think there are a lot of people who bring people onto campus who are not the elites. We do that all the time. And I think I think this place, when I came here 9 years ago, it's vastly different. And it's vastly different because many of us have had impact. Many people in this room have had serious impact on this place. I think sustainability is a different ecosystem than it was 9 years ago when Serve, Learn, Sustain opened. And that's partly because of Serve, Learn, Sustain success, but it's also because of the success of the Ray C. Anderson Center, because of the creation of the Atlanta Global Studies Center. Anna Stenport, who's now the Dean of Liberal Arts at UGA, had a huge impact with the creation of this center, which is joint with Georgia State, which is amazing. I think sustainability next, infrastructure and sustainability didn't exist 9 years ago. This campus did not look like it looks now 9 years ago in terms of the Candida building did not exist. We can critique the Candida building, but it's also an amazing amenity to have on campus for learning and research. And the RCE didn't exist. SCORE in the center that we're in now, we were one center in undergraduate education, and now the way that was institutionalized after the quality enhancement plan, there's a community-based learning center now in undergraduate education that didn't exist. There's our center now in the research side that didn't exist. We have Rebecca's walking right there. Rebecca from our center went over to Center for Teaching and Learning, and her new position, which is focused on integrating the SDGs into teaching and learning, didn't exist. We have a whole anchor institution program that we stood up through strategic planning that's now in community relations that did not exist. Sustainability next, and the way we meet once a month with sustainability staff and faculty and researchers from GTRI didn't exist. All that coordination and communication. I think it's a different place. But, to answer your question directly, and this is what I said this morning, I think the next step is that this stuff needs to matter in promotion and tenure, and that there have to be mechanisms from the top that require that all students, it can't just be up to individual faculty. It need to require that all students learn about the history of Atlanta, the history of technology and engineering, and there needs to be incentivizing rather than disincentivizing for transdisciplinary research. And we need this to happen at systems level, coming from leadership, as opposed to leadership has been supporting grassroots initiatives, and it led to everything we're talking about. But I think we're at the point now where if these things don't come at that systems level, this is about we can keep going in some of this direction, but you're not going to see this influencing tons of faculty and tons of students unless it comes from the top down.
And with that, we want to thank our panelists. I'm Joe Bozeman. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Stuart, for hosting us. And, applause.